Hi and welcome to another very exciting tutorial. Today we're going to update our space game Reloaded that we created several weeks ago, and many of you requested this update with a menu with lives and so on. If you haven't seen the original space game tutorial, the video is linked in the description below and you can click on the top right corner at the moment. And what we're going to do today is implementing this menu where we can change the difficulty, we can start a new game here, and actually what we see here is everything what we've done in the last tutorial. We can shoot and destroy all of our enemies here, but now we also have lives, and as soon as I have hit all of my 3 lives and they're gone, we hit the game over screen and we can display the score and start a new game. So every time actually a enemy was not hit by a torpedo like this one life is lost, we play a sound, and after 3 times we hit the game over screen. So if you haven't created the game before and you need the original files, go to the video that is linked in the video description below. It's called iOS Swift Game Tutorial SpriteKit Space Game with Explosions, and you will hit the tutorial files on GitHub, and you can then simply click on the clone or download button and then download the zip file. And just one last quick reminder about the Swift Tutorial Conference Bundle. You can still get it for a reduced price of $29 until midnight today. So if you want to have a look at the newest frameworks and over 10 hours of content for $29, now is your chance to get it for this reduced price. So with that said, let's have a look at the project files that we've downloaded from GitHub. So I'm opening up the folder, starting the Xcode project and confirming that. And let's put that right here, increasing the size a little here, and then let's have a quick look at our project structure. You'll find an assets folder right here. You can copy them for your own projects, but for now we can simply delete that assets folder since we have all of the assets that we previously needed already integrated into the project, like the explosion and so on and so on. And then what we can also do is structure our project a little bit more, since we're going to add several new files to it. So we have the app delegate, of course, we have a game scene, which in the game scene editor, which we are going to use later for our new elements, so that you can also have a look at how you can do things in a visual way, not just in code as we did it in the last tutorial. And we have some emitters for explosion, for the star field, and the spark image that we used for that. So first of all, let's use our game scene, which is actually where all of the action at the moment happens, and we can put that together with the game scene SKS file. And so I'm simply selecting both of them and select new group from selection. Let's call that game. Then let's put together all of those emitter stuff like the explosion, starfield, and spark, and also put that in a new group from selection, which are emitters. Let's do the same thing with the sound files. So let's bring that also into a new group. So let's call that sounds. And then let's move the game view controller to the top, the actions to the top, and also the main storyboard to the top. And now this is a lot more structured than it was before. And the first thing we want to do now is create a new scene for our menu. So what I'd like to do is click on File, New, File, and select a scene. Here, so I'm just typing in the scene, and since we're using SpriteKit and not SceneKit, I'm selecting my SpriteKit scene here. I'm going to call that menu scene. So let's create that one. And then let's have a look at what we want to do right here. So this is now a blank and empty scene, and we need to configure it a little bit. So let's select the attributes inspector for that. Let's change the background color to black. Let's set the anchor point to 0, 0, and let's change the size for an iPhone 6s Plus in portrait. So with that settings done, we have made our lives a little simpler, and we can now continue adding elements right here, just as we do in Interface Builder when we're building UIKit apps. And the first thing I'd like to do is creating a label with the title of our game. So I'm entering label in my object library, placing it somewhere here, and I'm entering space game. And this looks a little thin, so what I want to do is change the font, and I think I'm going to select Jill Sans for that. So let me search for that. See Jill Sans, and maybe even make this bold. No, I think semi-bold is just right. We increase the size a little here, somewhere around that, and with that we have a nice title for our game. And for our buttons, we're simply going to add some placeholders with a color sprite. So I'm adding the color sprite right here. It's okay if they're red. We are going to replace them later, and we're simply giving them a size of, let's say, 220 pixels width and about 55 pixels height, and then we can place them somewhere here in the center. Let's make sure that our space game title is also in the center, and then I'm simply copy and pasting the whole thing and something like that. And this is going to be the placeholder for our buttons, and then we're simply adding another label. I'm entering easy here. This is the label for the difficulty, so let's say easy, and also change that to Jill Sans, maybe bold or also semi-bold. That should do it. And to later access all of those nodes in code, what we need to do is give them some names. So this is going to be, or this is a placeholder for our new game button. So I'm going to add new game button here as a name. And we're doing the same thing here for the difficulty button. And with the label, which is going to be the difficulty label. And then we can actually directly go into code or create our new scene. So I'm selecting my new menu scene in our project outline, and then I'm creating a new Cocoa Touch class. So let's hit next here. And this is going to be of the name menu scene and a subclass of SK, so SpriteKit scene. So let's hit next and create that class. And as you can see, we're importing UIKit here, but what we really need is importing SpriteKit. And then we can move back to our SpriteKit scene here in Interface Builder and select the scene in the top left corner, select the identity or the class inspector, and enter our custom class, which is menu scene right here. And with that, both are connected and we can move into our menu scene. But one last thing is still to do. We have to add our star field emitter to the menu. So let's select the star field from our emitters group. Let's open the menu scene and simply drag and drop it somewhere here. Then I'm positioning it in the center. And we can even have a look at the animation by clicking on animate and simply run that. And as you can see, we have this beautiful starfield animation right here. And if you're interested, of course, in how to create that animation, just have a look at the last tutorial focused on that space game. There we create all of the emitters and so on. And to advance the simulation, as you can see, when we start animating, it takes a while before our star field reaches the end. So in code later, we're going to advance the simulation, and to have access also to our emitter, we select the attributes inspector again and give that a name, let's say star field. Alrighty, so now we are really configured and ready to go. So let's hit the menu scene.swift file and start creating some code. So first of all, we need some property representations for our nodes. First of all, let's begin with the star field, and this is going to be an SK emitter node. And then we have the new game button node, which is an SK sprite node. We have the difficulty button node, which is also an SK_sprite node, and we have the difficulty label node, which is an SK_label node. And with that, we have all the properties that we are going to need. So let's override the did_move_to_view function here, which is kind of like a view.load. So this is where we can initialize all of our interesting properties. So let's start with the star field, since we can simply use self and child node with name. And this is why we actually gave names to our node, because we can now initialize our properties with the objects that we have created visually. And we gave it the name star field, and this returns a simple node, and we can cast that to an SK emitter node by simply using as and an exclamation mark. And now when we're talking about the star field, as you have seen, we need to advance the simulation. So we simply take our star field and use the advanced simulation time function, and let's say we advance 10 seconds. So our screen should be filled with stars by then. Then let's do the same thing for the new game button. So let's use the new game button node. Let's do self, child node, new game button, cast that to an SK_sprite node. The same thing applies to the difficulty button node. So let's write difficulty button node equals, and then we can simply copy that piece of code, just paste that here. This is going to be the difficulty button. Now we have our properties ready, and we can now add the textures to our buttons. I'm going to show you this one time in code, and one time we're going to do that in Interface Builder. So let me show you what we have here. These are new assets. So we have a difficulty button, we have a new game button, and later we have the loose sound. So let's add those two elements to our image assets folder. So I'm dragging them to right here, and then since we're using the iPhone 7 Plus or 6 Plus as our size, I'm moving that to the 3x picture version. And just to get started, let's do the easy thing right here. So we can select our placeholder, select the texture right here, and select new game. And then we can also, again, resize that whole thing. It was 220 by 55, so let's add 220 here and 55. And with that, we have added our image here as a texture. And now let's see how we can also do that in code, which is pretty simple. So we're using the difficulty button node right here, access the texture property, and then we simply use SK_texture and initialize that with an image named. And the image name is simply difficulty button right here. And let's add the last piece of code here in did_move for our properties, which is for the difficulty label node. So again, we use self, child node with name. The name is difficulty label. We cast that to an SK_label node, and now we can actually focus on touching on our buttons and what happens if we touch one of them. And therefore we're overriding the touches begin function of our SK scene. And first of all, we need a touch point, or a touch to work with, so that we can get a location from that. And therefore let's create a touch object here, and we use the touches, which we get as a set as an argument here in our touches began function, and we simply use the first one. That should do it for our purposes here. And then with an if-let statement, we create a location constant and add the touch and its location in self. So we know exactly where we touched. And if we know where we touched, we can also determine which nodes are actually lying under our finger, or where we actually touched the surface. So to do that, we create a new nodes array object right here, and then we can use self and nodes at a specific point, and therefore we are using our location. And this nodes array now returns all of the nodes that are at our location where we touch the surface. And if we have a look at our menu scene, we should make sure that the star field is at the very bottom. So we should be able to simply first use the first object in our array to get either our new game button or the difficulty button. And to do that, I am checking if our nodes array and its first object and its name is equal to, for example, the new game button. And if it is, we want to transition to our game scene, so to our game, and therefore we create a transition, which is an SK transition, and we can, for example, use flip horizontal here or vertical or whatever you like, with a duration of 0.5 seconds. And then we also create a game scene object, which is our actual game. So we can simply use the game scene class, game scene, and initialize it with the current size. So we use self.size, and then we can use self.view and present a scene with a transition, and we simply use game scene here and a transition that we also called transition. And with that, we can build our application and run it on a real device or in the simulator. Both would work at the moment. Let's bring up Reflector here, and let me touch new game, and here we go. We can already play, but let's for now focus on the additional features, which is there's still another button that needs functionality, which is the change of difficulty. So let's add a new function, change difficulty, right below the touches began. And then we can use an else if statement here, else if our nodes array and its first element and its name is equal to difficulty button. Then what we want to do is we want to change our difficulty, and to also store that when the user or the player restarts the game, we're going to use user defaults. So let's create a user defaults object right here. So we use user defaults and the standard user defaults, and then we check if the difficulty label node and its text is currently easy. Then we use the difficulty label node again, change its text to hard. And then we use the user defaults and set a bool, no, not the uppercase, we use the lower case user defaults, and then we set a bool for a key. We set it to true for the key hard, and else we do the exact reverse thing. So we use the difficulty label mode, its text, set it to easy, use the user defaults, and we set the bool to false for the key hard. And then after all that's done, we can use our user defaults and save by simply calling the synchronize function. And this is how we actually change the difficulty and how we store it. And what we still need to do is correct this error with the quotation marks here, and then move to view, since we also want to display the correct difficulty when we launch the game. So again, we create a user defaults object here. We use user defaults and the standard user defaults, and if the user defaults and its bool value for a specific key, which is hard in our case, is true, so this would be equal to true, then we set difficulty label node and its text property to hard. And otherwise, we set the difficulty label node and its text to easy. And with that, we can again run our application, have a look at it in Reflector on my iPhone. And now if we press difficulty, we can switch between easy and hard, and now it's set to hard. And if we launch the application, again, it should still display hard. So let's see what happens. And here we go. It's still hard. So with that, we can actually start a new game and now concentrate on the lives that we want to spare or that we want to use when we miss some of our enemies right here. But before we continue, we should go back to our project structure here and maybe group our menu elements here by selecting them, new group from selection, and add the menu group here. And then we can continue by opening up our game scene again. And the first thing we need to do here is adding a new property with our lives. So I'm creating a lives array, which is going to be an array of SK sprite nodes. These are going to be the space shuttles or the spaceships that are displayed in the top right corner. And what I also would like to do is change the size of our score label at the moment, or at least the position. So I'm positioning it now at 80 pixels from the left, and let's maybe reduce the size a little to 28. And then what we also need is a new function called add lives. So this doesn't need any parameters, but we want to call it directly when we move to that view. So we simply call add lives right here. And then we can also already do something with our new difficulty that we can adjust. And as you know, if you've watched the last tutorial about that, we are using a timer to fire repeatedly and add new aliens, or call the add alien function right here. And this actually increases the difficulty. If we fire the timer more frequently, then we can create more aliens. So let's use our user default. So let's maybe create a new time interval variable first and set it to 0.75, which is the default time interval which we already used. But now let's use an if statement and the user defaults standard and a bool for key, which was hard in our case. And if this is true, we use our time interval and set it to 0.3 seconds. And with that, if we now use the time interval variable right here, a alien is generated, or more aliens are generated based on the difficulty that we have chosen. And for the add lives function that we have already created, let's now use the lives array and initialize it again with an SK sprite node array. And then we use a for loop. We want 3 lives, so we use a live in 1, 2, 3. And every time we run or we iterate through that loop, we create a live node, which is an SK sprite node with an image named shuttle. This is our shuttle image that we have used also for our player. And now we can continue with positioning our live nodes. And therefore, we use our live node and access its position property, create a new CG point with X and Y value. And the Y value is pretty simple. We can simply use self frame size height. Since we are starting counting at the top, at the lower left corner, we have to subtract now 60 to move it 60 pixels down from the top. And for the X position, we have to move it the whole way to the right. So self frame size width. And now each shuttle should be displaced a little. The first shuttle is supposed to be at the right edge of the screen, and the second one a little bit left to it. But definitely it should be moved. So let's subtract the live node and its size and its width from the right corner. And since we're using a loop, we can simply use but we need to convert that to a CG float for first. 4 minus the amount, 4 minus the current live times the width of a live node. And this always positions our live node correctly. And then we can add our child, which is live node. And we can also use our lives array and append our live node. And with that, we have added our lives. So let's have a look at that in the game. So I'm installing right now. bringing up reflector. And if we now hit new game, you can see that we have our 3 shuttles placed neatly in the right corner of the screen. Maybe we should bring down our score a little bit more. So I'm maybe subtracting 80 here, or let's say 70. This should look a little better. And now we have to actually remove our lives if one of our aliens hits the bottom edge of the screen. And therefore, we have to look at our add alien function, which sounds a little strange since we actually want to remove lives, but why are we doing that when we add aliens? And this is because our aliens do have an action array which moves them down. And every time we destroy one of the aliens, this animation is prevented from finishing and doing all of what's coming next, which is remove from parent, for example. But that means that we can add one more action here that is only triggered if our alien moved completely off screen. So we add we append a new action to our action array here before we remove the alien from the screen, but after it reached its final destination, which means that it has never been destroyed. So we append a new element here, which is an SK action, and we simply want to use a code block here, and now we can add all of the functionality that we want to run here. And the first thing that we want to do is play a sound. So let's add another sound here, which is the loose sound, and make sure that we have selected copy items if needed. We can create groups now and add to targets. But with that, we have created our loose sound here, which sounds like that. And every time we reach the outer limit of our animation here, this sound plays, and we lose one of our lives. So let's go back to the game scene and add some code here. First of all, we want to play that sound, and to do that, we use self and run, and this is again an SK action, so we can simply use SK action and play sound file named, which is loose.mp3, and we do not want to wait for completion to play it again, in case we lose some lives fairly quickly. And then what we can check is if our lives array and its count, so the number of elements in our array, is still greater than 0, which means that we still have some lives left, we need to remove a life. So we use a life node, we use self and our lives array, and the first element here, and the first element is always the correct one since we're removing always one of them. So we get a life node using our array to get one, and then we use that life node, which we can directly unwrap since we know that it exists, and then we can remove it from parent, which means that it disappears. And then we use our array, lives array, and remove the first object, and by that we can always use first to get the correct live node or the correct shuttle. And this is the first part of it. Now the second part is we need to check if self and lives array and its count has now reached 0, and if it did that, this means that actually our game is over, and therefore we need to create a new game over screen. So a game over screen transition, and since this requires almost the same steps as we already did with the menu, what I'm going to do is simply adding that for you right here. So I've already done that, and I'm selecting the game over scene right here and the game over scene Swift file, placing them right here, and finish. And let's just have a quick look at that. So we have again our game over screen right here. We have some placeholders for our button. We have our score label. They are all named correctly. And in the proper Swift file, let's just go quickly through that. We have a score integer. We have the score label property, and we have the new game button property. And we did actually pretty much the same thing as we did in our menu. We have initialized a new new game button node with the proper name from the scene. We have added a texture right here. And what we also did is applied the score to the score text label. And we're going to access this score property from our game scene in a second, but let's just have a quick look at that, which is also pretty much the same code. We're simply going to create a new game scene right here, and again present that scene if we want to create a new game. And let me group that into a game over folder for now, game over. And let's close that down. Let's close the menu. Let's close the emitters. Let's close the sounds. And it's already looking a little more cleaned up. So what we want to do here is, since now is game over time, we add another transition. So sk transition. Again, let's say a flip horizontal, duration 0.5 seconds, and let's create a game over screen. And therefore we use sk scene with a file named game over scene, and we cast that directly to a game over scene, which is important since we want to access a specific property, which is the score. So we use game over, we use the score property, and we set it to self.score. And now we can simply again use self.view and present the scene with the transition. So we use the game over scene that we've just created with the transition that we just created. And now I'm running this application again. So let's see what happens. And here we go. We start a new game. We can start shooting. But now let's lose. And I lost really quickly. And as you can see, we have displayed our game over screen. I can create a new game and do that whole thing from the start. So I hope you enjoyed this this new game or these new game features. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next week.